everyone, Chris Colati, Principal Technologist and Field CTO with Cohesity, to talk a little bit about our VMware Cloud Director integration. I'm going to do this in two videos. So this first one's going to be the provider side, and the second one will be the tenant side. And that's primarily so you can watch just the one you want to watch. So let's talk first about how we configure the Cohesity cluster for multi-tenancy, because that's the first step that you would have to do. Now, what we're going to do is you can go to your cluster summary, and you can click configure, and what you'll see is there's this option to enable organizations. That's the first and really the only thing you need to do to get going. You can allow organizations to share a storage domain. In this case, we've decided not to. And then from there, you can actually start to configure your organizations, and then we will actually map those organizations over to VMware Cloud Director. So let's flip over and take a look at the organizations that are configured here. So we can go back up to the gear icon, click our organizations, and we can see here, I've actually got two organizations defined. I've got Rand Corporation and Stark Industries. Both of them are active. They are actually using separate storage domains. You'll notice they have an organization ID, and then they've got individual organization users and groups. Now, this is the initial root user, and you can add additional users, and that will allow them to actually get into the Cohesity cluster using their organization credentials. And we'll show that a little bit on the tenant side of things. So what we're going to do is from here, we can do some interesting things with our policies as a provider. So the first thing we would do is we create policies and we assign those policies to these organizations. So if I actually go over to my policy view, I can see that I've got my standard policies, gold, silver, bronze, but then I've got these custom policies, one for Rand and one for Stark. And we as the provider, based on what we're talking to with our client, can decide, hey, what policies do you need to see within your organization? Maybe we'll give you our gold, silver, bronze right up front, and those are ones that you can use anytime you want. And then maybe, as the customer, they're paying for an additional custom policy that would only be assigned to them. So you can actually see here that the Stark custom policy is only assigned to Stark Industries. The Rand is only assigned to Rand Industries or Rand Corporation, but the gold, silver, bronze is assigned to both. Which means that each of these orgs can use gold, silver, and bronze, and then their own custom one. And that's very powerful to put in the hands of the user so that they can decide, hey, which VMs and which vApps in VMware Cloud Director do I want to back up and how on which policy? Now, for me to point this out, or I do want to point this out, that the provider has to set this up and then assign those policies to the user, and then the user can consume them. It's like any other consumption model. The customers of the organizations can't actually define the policies. They can only leverage the policy. So if I actually go over and look back at my organizations and I click into Rand Corporation, we can see that there is some stuff being backed up. There's already a vCloud Director source, which I'll get into in a second, which is also configured by the administrator of the system or by the service provider. These are the protection policies that they have available to them. And then what we can see is we can see which protection groups are part of that policy. So this is actually very, very easy to understand. We can add groups to it, but this is all around one organization. So if we actually go to the data protection view and we look at our sources, we can see that we've configured one VMware Cloud Director source. This is done by the service provider, and then we will actually do the mappings between the organizations within this large Cloud Director implementation and then those different organizations themselves. So if we actually look by organization, we'll actually see that there's no sources found, and that's by design because we're in context of the system administrator. What I can actually do is I can go on this side and impersonate one of those users. So I'm going to go ahead and impersonate Rand Corporation. And you'll notice my view is going to switch, and this is what they would see as the consumer, and I'll show that a little bit more in the second video. But now you can see that a few things have changed. I can actually see my protection jobs, and we'll go into that in a second. But I can actually, as the provider, impersonate somebody and create protection jobs for them, or I can provide self-service. The self-service is going to be a little bit better for the consumer, and that'll be more in the second video. So let me go back and show the mappings capability and how we actually map the organizations on the Cohesity side over to the VMware Cloud Director side. So here we've got VMware Cloud Director. This is 10.1 with the HTML UI, and I'm logged in as system administrator. And you can see here are my two tenants that I've got, and these are standard tenants. I mean, everything in here looks just like VMware Cloud Director. What I want to do first is I want to go and look at this data protection piece. Now, this is enabled via an installation script that's available on the Cohesity GitHub page, and there's some really good instructions. There's a couple of prerequisites, and you follow all of that, and this tab will show up. Well, once we go here and we look at data protection, this is where we can see our clusters that are attached, and we can certainly have multiple clusters. We can add another one. We can edit the details of this one. And the clusters that we have would all show up here. And then we can go to our settings and we can see that we can restrict groups. We can allow the tenants to have cluster access. We can white label it and a couple other things. What we then want to do is we actually want to map the organizations. So here, if we click edit, we can see that these are already mapped. If they were not mapped, we would see additional tenants on the VCD side, and we would see the Cohesity tenants, and we can click the ones that should be mapped. In this case, we've already done that. We would provide the login information and everything we need to connect, but we can see here that we've mapped the tenants. Rand Corporation in the VCD side is mapped to the same name in Cohesity, and Stark Industries is mapped to Stark Industries. Again, as you add tenants on the Cohesity data platform and you add tenants inside VCD, you'd have to come back here as the service provider and map those. Once they're mapped, then the self-service part is basically enabled for the users to do their own thing and start to manage their backups. So from a service provider side, it's actually very simple to set up. The only thing that's required is enabling organizations, creating users, and then mapping those users inside VMware Cloud Director. So with that, that's the service provider side of VCD and Cohesity, and we'll flip over and do the tenant view.